To understand the book of Ezekiel, you must first know a little about the history of the prophet Ezekiel and when he lived. We are going to read what he says here on Wikipedia about the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel was a Hebrew priest and prophet who exercises his ministry between 595 and 570 BC during the Jewish captivity in Babylon. The name Ezekiel means God is my strength, and his prophecies are found in the book of Ezekiel, being his message of reverence for with the holiness of God, and includes reflections on the future reconstruction of the Temple of Jerusalem, emphasizing also the moral responsibility of each individual. Unlike other prophets, Ezekiel had important revelations in the form of symbolic visions that, according to the Hebrew belief, were transmitted to him by Yahweh. Ezekiel provides detailed descriptions of his visions. In his first vision, Ezekiel perceived the tetramorphs, that is, the four living beings pulling a celestial chariot, and here is an image of the tetramorphs that paints here the Creator Yahweh, who is a black man. Here they have him as a white man. And the angels and the four heads that I have not seen anyone decipher what this tetramorph means. On another occasion I will explain what the tetramorph means, that to decipher it you have to know the book Revelation, also 2nd Esdras, among other books. His prophecies warned of the imminent destruction of Jerusalem, just like Jeremiah was a prophet who warned and prophesied the curses that came to the Israelites, who are the blacks, the Latins, and the Native American Indians, condemned the idolatrous practices and envisioned the restoration of Israel. Ezekiel lived at the same time as the prophet Jeremiah. Becoming a prophet during the Babylonian exile, he was married, he was the son of Buzi, and was taken captive to Babylon along with King Jehoiakim, Jeconiah, also known as Coniah. That this king is a key to decipher Ezekiel 17, where he says that he took from the heart of the cedar the generations of Yahuwashi that are explained in chapter 1 of Matthew, that in this first chapter verse 11 he is named Jeconiah. I think Ezekiel was taken captive to Babylon along with King Jehoiakim of Judah in the year 597 before Christ, and remained in a city of Mesopotamia called Tel Aviv near Nippur in Chaldea, on the banks of the Kobar River. 5 years later, at the age of 30, Yahweh called him to the position of prophet, which he exercised among the exiles for 22 years, the exiles of the kingdom of Judah, who were the blacks, until the year 570 before Christ. The first chapter of Matthew is the key to deciphering Ezekiel 17, where it says the highest branch of the cedar, which is the generations of Yahuwashi, and when he speaks of the king who was transported to Babylon, he refers to Jeconiah. That the first book of Matthew says thus: the book of the generations of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac fathered Jacob. Jacob fathered Judah and his brothers. And here in verse 11 it talks about when the Babylonian king began to invade the kingdom of Judah, and says Josiah fathered Jehoiakim, and Jehoiakim fathered Jeconiah, and this Jeconiah is another name for Jehoiakim that is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah and Chronicles in the book of Kings, like the grandson of Josiah begot Jeconiah and his brothers in the transmigration of Babylon. We are going to read Ezekiel 17 of the 1569 Spanish Bible, including here the commentary that Casiodoro de Reina has, that he says by a very elegant parable proposes the prophet by command of Yahweh the rebellion of King Zedekiah against King Nebuchadnezzar and his punishment, and predicts the restoration of the kingdom in Yahuwashi is the comment, but in reality, this parable is more than that. It predicts the curses of Deuteronomy 28 to the Israelites, especially to the kingdom of Judah during the transatlantic slave trade, and also predicts the fall of Esau at the end. But Casiodoro de Reina did not understand. He did not understand the whole parable. What is clear that in the part where he gives the example of the parable, he does not explain the parable, but he gives an example so that you understand the parable he is talking about Zedekiah. But it is nothing more than an example of an event that was happening during the time of Ezekiel in the captivity of Babylon. And it reads, "And the word of Yahweh came unto me, saying, Son of man, put forth a riddle, and speak a parable unto the house of Israel, and say, Thus said the Lord Yahweh, a great eagle," in several places, including in Deuteronomy 28. Where he speaks of the curses that will fall on the Israelites, that will send people like an eagle with a fierce face, talking about the European empires that came to Africa and the American continent to afflict the Israelites. They are the blacks at that time. The prophecy of Hosea 7:8 of the mixture of the Native Americans with the Spanish was not yet fulfilled. At that time the blacks and the indigenous people. An eagle or the European empires that were mostly England or Great Britain, Spain, France and Holland, but there were other European empires with great wings, long-winged, full of feathers. Here when he says this full of feathers, he is talking about the feathers that are mentioned in the fourth book of Esdras, 2nd Esdras, 11 and 12, where he speaks of the contrary feathers that was the rebirth of the Roman Empire during the time of the rebirth in the 1400s. That began the colonization and European imperialism. And also, in Daniel chapter 2, where he speaks of the vision of Nebuchadnezzar, where he says that the feet are part iron part clay. Here in 2nd Esdras he calls them contrary feathers. Daniel calls them part clay and part iron, and that they are divided, and here they are called diverse, but this word is used in other parts of the scriptures as division, that they are divided, they are against each other. That is, Great Britain was against Spain, Spain against France, they were not united. And it says of different colors came to Lebanon, and Lebanon is a figure, a parable, that means settlements of the Phoenicians that in ancient times referred to the north and west of Africa in its majority, and also the other coasts of Africa. That the Phoenicians had roots to all the coasts of Africa, and of course the Phoenicians too, they were the first to come to the New World, and their roots included roots to the American continent, and took the highest branch of the cedar that is explained here in Ezekiel 17 itself, when it speaks of Jehoiakim and the generations of Yehoashi, that is, the kings of Judah. This is the bud of the cedar. And it has also been suggested to us that Lebanon refers to the house in the forest of Lebanon that Solomon built. But in reality it does not refer to that, although this house, it was named that way because they used trees and wood and materials from the new continent that Solomon sent the Phoenicians here, on this side of the world, to the American continent to get their material, their wood, their gold, etc. So that's why they call it the house of the forest of Lebanon, mentioned in the first book of Kings chapter 7 verse 2, but it does not refer to this. No, this parable does not refer to that. It refers to the Phoenician settlements that include the north, the west, and the coasts of Africa, and even Spain, because the first slaves arrived from Spain, and the south of Spain is also part of the ancient Phoenician settlements, as I am going to show you here in these images. The book of Revelation chapter 17 helps you decipher who is the first and the second eagle of Ezekiel 17, because it explains that John, the Apostle John, lived during the reign of the Romans and wrote the book of Apocalypse during the reign of Domitian, when he was already about 80 years old or more, and mentions 7 heads of the beast. Here he explains it to you, where he talks about Babylon the Great, that is the United States, that Psalms 137 says Edom, the Edomites, are described as the daughter of Babylon. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains or 7 governments on which the woman sitteth. In other words, United States has assumed 7 kingdoms and has attributes and has the crowns of 7 kingdoms that have already passed, and here he explains it to you and says, and there are 7 kings or kingdoms. 5 are fallen, and when he says 5 are fallen, he is talking about Egypt, Babylon, Persia, Greece and Assyria, that those are kingdoms that have already fallen, and he says 1 is, he is talking about Rome. Because he was writing this book during the time of Domitian, that if you read the story, Domitian tries to kill John and put him in a pot with hot oil, and when he put him in the pot nothing happened to John, so Domitian got scared and jailed him there in an island next to Turkey in Patmos. That is where he wrote this book, so he is talking about that 5 already. 5 empires or kingdoms have already fallen, talking about Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia and Greece. 1 is, he is talking about Rome, and the other is not yet come. This is talking about Rome during the rebirth, that is the 7th. This is the 7th kingdom, and it is the first eagle of Ezekiel 17, and here it says, and when it will come, and when come these empires of the Renaissance, it is necessary that it last a short time. And the beast that was and is not speaking of the reincarnated Rome during the Renaissance is also the 8th. This is speaking that after the rebirth of Rome from all these empires, especially Great Britain, comes the 8th kingdom, and that 8th kingdom is the 2nd eagle of Ezekiel 17. And the beast that was and is not, is also the 8th king, and is of the 7 he is talking about, that he is of the 7, that he is of the empires of the Renaissance. of Rome, or more specifically England, and it is going to perdition. Now we know that the first eagle is the European colonial empires, and that Lebanon represents the coasts of Africa and the west of Africa, and Spain also. Many slaves came from there, from Spain. And the highest branch of the cedar is the generations of the Messiah Yahuwashi of the kings of Judah. He cropped off the top of his young twigs, speaking of the kings of Judah, and the descendants of the Jewish kings. That implies that there were descendants of the kings among the slaves. And he took them to the land of traffic, specifically the colonial United States, under Great Britain, and he put them in the city of merchants. He also took from the seed of the land, which are those who are not from the lineage of kings of Judah. In this case, he speaks of Zedekiah. In general, he is talking about the rest of Judah, and he put it in a good field to sow by planting it next to great waters, and he put it like a willow tree, that in other parts of the scriptures trees represent races or peoples. In this case he is describing them as a willow tree to the Israelites too. The blacks who were transplanted, and it grew, and became a spreading vine of low stature. Where it says low stature, it means second class. At one time the Israelites, descendants of blacks and indigenous people, were considered 3/5 of human beings legally in the colonies, and later in the independent United States, whose branches turned toward him, and the roots thereof were under him, the colonies. So it became a vine, and brought forth branches, and shot forth sprigs. And here is the second eagle, which is the 8th head in the book of Revelation 17, Babylon the Great. There was also another great eagle, deep, with great wings and many feathers, United States, and behold, this vine, the Israelites, did bend her roots toward him, and shot forth her branches toward him, that he might water it by the furrows of her plantation. That this fits with the curses of Deuteronomy, where it says that you will have to go to your enemies for all your needs. And continues, it says, it was planted in a good soil by great waters, that it might bring forth branches, and that it might bear fruit, that it might be a goodly vine. Say thou, thus saith the Lord Yahweh. Shall it prosper? Shall he not pull up the roots thereof, and cut off the fruit thereof, that it wither? It shall wither in all the leaves of her spring, even without great power or many people to pluck it up by the roots thereof. In other words, we will never prosper, the Israelites, under the Anglo-American Empire, and the curses of Deuteronomy 28 will fall on us. And behold, it is planted. Will it prosper? Planted here means transplanted, because they were transplanted from different places on the coast of Africa to the new continent. Will it prosper? Will it not dry up completely when the east wind touches it? In the furrows of its greenery, it will dry. That is, it will not prosper. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, now to the rebellious house, that they are the Israelites. Have you not understood what these things mean? And this is where he gives an example in Ezekiel 17 and 12, gives an example of an event that was happening during the time of Ezekiel. And here he says, tell them, behold, the king of Babylon Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem, and took your king, Jehoiachin, and his princes, and took them with him to Babylon. When he says princes, among them was Daniel. Ezekiel, the 3 friends of Daniel, takes them to Babylon. He also took from the seed, that when he says seed is the people who do not descend from the generations of the Messiah Yahuwashi that you call Jesus Christ, who in that case was referring to Zedekiah the puppet, and made an alliance, and brought him to take an oath, and took the strong of the land. That this is described in the 2nd book of Kings chapter 24 verse 17. And in Jeremiah 37 verse 1. Ezekiel 17 and 14, that the kingdom might be base, that it might not lift itself up, but that by keeping of his covenant it might stand. But he rebelled against him, sending his ambassadors to Egypt to give him horses, and many people talking about Zedekiah breaking the pact with the Babylonian king after the Egyptians and Babylonians had a battle, and they were almost tied. The puppet king Zedekiah thought that maybe he could make an alliance with Egypt. So he says, will he prosper? Will he escape? He who did these things, who broke the covenant with the Babylonian king, can he who broke the covenant be delivered? As I live, says Yahweh, that he will die in the midst of Babylon. Speaking of Zedekiah, if you look at history, Zedekiah tried to flee to Egypt After he asked for help from Egypt and Babylon defeated Egypt, he tried to flee to Egypt and was captured, and after they captured him they killed his sons, and then Nebuchadnezzar gouged out Zedekiah's eyes in the place of the king who made him reign, which is Nebuchadnezzar, whose oath he despised and whose alliance with him he broke, as I tell you, King. Nebuchadnezzar gouged out Zedekiah's eyes, described in Jeremiah 39 verse 7. Neither shall Pharaoh with his mighty army and great company do nothing for him in battle when they, by casting up mounts, and building forts, to cut off many lives he is talking about. When Nebuchadnezzar finally invaded and destroyed Jerusalem because he despised the oath, speaking of Zedekiah, then the deal he had with the Babylonian king. Seeing he despised the oath by breaking the covenant, when, lo, he had given his hand, and that is talking about an old custom that existed among the pagan customs that made a pact and made an animal sacrifice and put their hand on top of the animal and then sacrificed it, and hath done all these things, he shall not escape. Talking about Zedekiah, who tried to escape to Egypt and they captured him, and as I say at the end, they killed his sons and gouged out his eyes and took him away to Babylon. Therefore thus the Lord Yahweh has said, as I live, and that which he described of Zedekiah is something that actually happened in history, but he uses it as an example to explain the parables of the eagles. Therefore thus saith the Lord Yahweh, as I live, surely mine oath that he hath despised. Now, he is speaking of his oath. In other words, it is saying, just as Zedekiah broke the oath with Nebuchadnezzar and was punished and was blinded, just the same I will punish my people, and my covenant that he hath broken, even it will I recompense upon his own head, and spread my net over him. This net is also described in Ezekiel chapter 12 verse 13, and he shall be taken in my snare. I will bring him to Babylon. That is no longer speaking here from ancient Babylon, he is talking about the daughter of Babylon, or the United States, and will plead, judge, with him there, for his trespass that he hath trespassed against me, and all his fugitives and all his bands shall fall by the sword. That this fits with Daniel 11 and 33, where he talks about the Maccabean revolt, that the leaders of the Maccabean revolt fell by the sword. That is, you can't resist, you cannot revolt like Zedekiah or Judas Maccabean, because you are going to die by the sword. And that also fits with Romans 13. And those who will be left will be scattered to all winds. That happened during slavery. And you will know that I Yahweh have spoken. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh. Now he is talking about the final part of the prophecies. I will also take of the highest branch of the high cedar of the generations of Yahuwashi. That here is speaking of the Messiah of Jesus, whom you call Jesus, who is Yahuwashi, and will set it. I will crop off from the top of his young twigs a tender one of those generations of Yahuwashi is the Messiah Yahuwashi, and will plant it upon a high and lofty mountain that is described in Psalms as the kingdom of God in Psalms 2 verses 6. On the high mountain of Israel I will plant it and raise branches, and it will bear fruit and make magnificent cedar, and all the birds will dwell under it. Everything that flies will dwell in the shade of its branches. That this tree is also described in Daniel 4 and 12 and Matthew 13 verse 32. And all the trees, or all the people of the field, will know that I Yahweh brought down the high tree. That the last kingdom belongs to Esau, that is the high tree. At the end of time it struck down Esau, and raised the low tree, that are the Israelites, dried up the green tree, that are the Edomites, and have made the dry tree to flourish, that are the Israelites. I Yahweh have spoken and have done it.